Hello, and a very warm welcome to episode 4 of COP28 Covered, the daily podcast brought to you from our award-winning ED editorial team here on the ground at the crucial climate summit in Dubai. It is the Super Saturday of 2nd of December. I'm ED's publisher Luke Nichols. I'm joined out on a nice cool evening breeze by our deputy editor Sarah George.
Hi everyone.
No Matt Mace, once again. I'm afraid he is well and truly under the weather. But Sarah and I have another packed show to bring you, including a full roundup of all of today's announcements, plus interviews with the UK Corporate Leaders Group and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and hopefully a little fun and games along the way. So let's get on with the show. Welcome back to COP28 Covered, hosted in collaboration with the UN Climate Change High-Level Champions-led Race to Zero campaign. I'm excited to say that we are not in the media zone for this recording because Sarah and I have in fact decided to boycott the fluorescent lighting and instant coffees in favour of some nice outdoor seating here. We have the incredible coloured lights of the Awasal Dome just in our backdrop, with people filtering in and out of various side events and discussions, which is still ongoing as the evening draws in. This really is the COP that never sleeps. So Sarah, how are you doing? I haven't seen you all day since our little shopping spree at the mall first thing this morning.
Yeah, I should say that we were buying audio equipment for this podcast and not just absolutely splashing out on designer gear, just in case the audience get any wrong ideas. I'd say that while today has been busy, it's run pretty smoothly, and as you say, we've both had a chance to get out and about from the media centre a little bit. As you'll hear, I've been doing some podcasts for today, also storing some in the bank for later along. So I've had the chance to well and truly explore and see some of the landmarks at Expo City, which really is like a city, to be honest, but it's like a city of the future. So we're sat outside now in this sort of plaza with multiple waterfalls. We're covered by what looks like, I can only describe them as parasols, but they almost look as if they're made of circuit boards, and they're metallic gold. They sort of shine in the sun. It really is a visually stunning place to be, and I'm sure I'm not doing it justice on the pod.
Yeah, well, it's difficult to do this place justice, isn't it? As you say, it is a city in its own right, and just every avenue or road path you walk down here has just got something new and crazy and difficult to describe, as you say. So I suppose on that note, a shout out to Matt, who's not got such luxuries today. He's cooped up back at the Airbnb, still very much unwell. We wish him all the best, and hopefully he'll be back fighting fit in a day or two's time. It did mean, though, that Matt got to witness a spectacular display from the Red Arrow's equivalent from the balcony of our apartment. He WhatsApped us earlier a video of these planes soaring past our window. As I'm sure many people will know, this weekend actually marks UAE Union Day, which means it's effectively a bank holiday weekend out here, and there's loads going on in here and around the city. But loads going on, as I say, especially in here, because I don't know about you, Sarah, but I think despite being a Saturday, today's probably been the most intense of them all so far, with a lot more big announcements, also loads of interviews between us. I've been running between zones for various meetings and different chats. You've been out single-handedly managing all of the podcast chats. Actually, one thing we haven't really done is just this, kind of stopped, reflected on what it's actually like here, because it's very easy just to get sucked into all the interviewing and working in the media centre without actually taking it all in. So Sarah, I mean, after the first couple of days and nights here, what are your COP highlights so far? Anything weird and wonderful standing out to you?
I mean, definitely as we came to register, the thing that stood out were a bunch, I'm going to say at least 24 vegan activists sitting outside with special matching t-shirts. There's also one activist, and she is here wearing a fruit basket on her head, trying to promote plant-based eating as well. They were holding signs that had essentially a picture of the earth as a kebab being shaved away by people eating meat. So that really stood out to me. Something poignant today as well was that someone had set up a display on one of the avenues here with dozens of children's shoes, empty, used, dusty children's shoes, set out on the floor along with a banner that said "No climate justice without action on human rights," or words to that effect. So a few things there that stood out, but if anyone's never been to a COP, a thing that stands out is just how busy it is and how much there is going on. While we're keeping on track of the big announcements coming out of the presidency and we're hand selecting our interviewees, there are around 90 pavilions here in Blue Zone alone. So many themes and topics to dive into. So whether you're interested in oceans, carbon markets, AI and clean tech. There's something going on here and it's impossible to cover it all, which means that there's a lot of people here, and people wearing all sorts of traditional dress as well. It's fantastic to see people walking past in three-piece business suit, and then people coming past in the other direction in things like traditional Japanese dress, headdress and face paint from the Amazonian region as well. It's a delight for the senses, but also very overwhelming for the senses at times.
Yeah, it's incredibly eclectic. Question actually, have you ridden the little green climate train?
I have not, but we did take a ride on the media buggy today. Why? Is that what you've been up to? I've been hard at work getting the interviews, and Luke's on something that looks like, if you're in the UK, you'll know what I mean when I say the little trains you get at seaside resort towns. Typically, instead of commuters, you've got 5-year-olds on these things.
You brought me down a rung there, but I mean, yeah, I thought it was quite cool. It's a nice little green, old-fashioned. I think it's called the Actionist Climate Train. We'll put a picture alongside the episode with this podcast, so you can ride that between the zones here, which I thought was quite quirky. The other thing that stood out to me, you mentioned all the people around here. I don't know, Sarah, if you've seen all the cats around here. I've spotted quite a few stray cats apparently, and it goes back to even the expo that was hosted here back in 2020. I was lucky enough to come out and do some reporting on that, and there were a lot of them there, and they implemented a policy of trap, neuter, release, as I remember it, and established a cat committee comprised of different expo staff who are still here on site helping relocate and rehome, hopefully, all of the cats found on site. So yeah, there's a resident cat that keeps following me around. I keep spotting the same ginger cat everywhere I go. So yeah, there's a couple of the random highlights for me, trains and cats. Back to what we're actually here for then, Sarah, because it's that time for you to deliver up today's action tracker. So a reminder for listeners, this is our verbal equivalent of our daily analysis article on ed.net, which summarises all of the key developments every day from COP. So Sarah, are you ready?
I'm as ready as I'll ever be.
Okay, so with our COP28 action tracker rundown for Saturday, 2nd of December, take it away.
Yeah, so the word of the day is definitely energy. More than 110 countries have signed on to a new global decarbonisation accelerator, so the presidency here is calling it. It has several major pledges for 2030, including trebling the world's renewable energy generation capacity and doubling the annual rate of energy efficiency improvements. These are both things that have been advocated for by IRENA and the IEA, but those bodies have also called for much stronger action on fossil fuel phasing down and out. So with that in mind, that announcement on the accelerator has somewhat been dampened by a new oil and gas decarbonisation charter. 50 companies representing around 40% of global oil production have signed this charter, which commits them to end routine flaring by 2030 on the road to net zero operational emissions by 2050. The problem is that operational emissions only account for around 5% of the sector's total climate footprint, so NGOs have been very quick to call out the elephant in the room there. There's also been a big primer for the health theme day. The presidency of COP28 has partnered with the World Health Organization and the government's Ministry of Health and Prevention to unveil a UAE declaration on climate and health with more than 120 signatory nations. It is the first declaration of its kind in which this many countries acknowledge the link between the climate crisis and public health crises and acknowledge climate solutions as public health solutions. So a lot there on diseases that are made more transmissible in a warmer world, such as tuberculosis and malaria, also on health issues that can be caused by flooding and displacement, also everything to do with air pollution as well. So that's a nice primer for tomorrow. Other things to mention are that French President Emmanuel Macron has worked with the UN to launch a new global database for corporate net zero targets. This will be one that regular ED readers and listeners will be keen to hear about. Forgot to mention there that Michael R. Bloomberg is involved in this because of course he is. The proof of concept for the net zero data public utility is live now, and it will cover all emissions scope 1, 2 and 3 and operate on a global basis. It is in beta at the moment, so you have until the start of March 2024 to give feedback. I'll leave it there because there is a full roundup on our website for our members.
Yeah, as you say, loads gone on, but loads being covered on the action tracker, the official action tracker on the ed.net website. So, well done, take a breath. And actually, with Matt's absence and me hanging about with the cats and riding a little COP train, you've once again handled all of the interviews for the show as well, Sarah. So, who have we got coming up in this episode, and what are we chatting about?
Sure, so our first interview, Luke, is with Beverly Cornaby, who heads up the UK Corporate Leaders Group at CISL, so regular ED listeners will be aware of them, but for those who aren't, she does a handy introduction. She's here to talk us through the key policy asks of businesses and academics, and essentially gives her thoughts on whether the private sector could perhaps plug some of the loopholes we talked about in terms of waning ambitions on oil and gas in particular.
And then we're going to roll straight on into our second interview just like we did yesterday. So who was that with?
Yeah, so this is a bit of a different one for regular ED listeners. We don't normally have the pleasure of getting people that are senior at multilateral development banks on, but they play such a crucial role in the COP process that it was great to sit down with two economists from the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and essentially talk about all the good work they've been doing on nature-related investments. So the bank essentially pledged in 2021 to align its financing with the Paris Agreement, then subsequently said that at least half of its funding should be dedicated as specific climate-related funding. It has now said that essentially making energy-efficient infrastructure and so-called grey infrastructure that's otherwise more sustainable isn't enough. We need to realise the benefit of A, co-locating that with green infrastructure, and B, doing green infrastructure as a standalone, so some of these bigger conservation and restoration projects. So quite a meaty discussion, but hopefully it can help make sense of what is going on at these multilateral development banks.
Yeah, sounds fascinating. So here's Sarah's two chats then. First up with Beverly at the UK Corporate Leaders Group, followed straight on by that three-way discussion with Eric and JP at the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Here's them both in full.
Yes, so it's Sarah here. We are very firmly in the blue zone and it is the midday sun part of the day, so I'm happy to be in the air-conditioned part of this particular zone with Beverly from the Corporate Leaders Group. Thank you so much for your time. How has your COP been so far?
It's been good, thank you. Aside from the heat, which is, it's very much appreciated that we're in the aircon at the moment. There's been some good meetings that I've been to, some really good events. Really looking forward to hearing the announcements today that are coming, and also good to see some of the announcements that's already been made.
Of course, and I realise we've got listeners to this podcast who maybe aren't regular listeners, so perhaps a quick introduction to CISL and the Corporate Leaders Group would be in order.
Yeah, so CISL is the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. We are part of the University of Cambridge, going for over 30 years. We deliver education, research, innovation and convening. So the part that the Corporate Leaders Group is within convening, which means that we are bringing together businesses and taking the voice of those businesses to government on climate issues. And we're really working with those businesses that are leading in across sectors, and so those that have very strong climate commitments and strong sustainability plans.
Got it. And I know that the Institute has come to COP with 8 policy asks. As you mentioned, this is an opportune moment for what the UN calls non-state actors to speak with a clear voice to the policymakers who are here, and these asks are designed to unlock private sector ambition and galvanise their participation in delivering global agreements like Paris. So what are the key policy asks that you and your team are here at this COP with this time around?
We have 8 asks in total, 2 of which are cross-cutting, and those ones are ensuring people are part of it and that innovation is considered as well. The top asks that we have are around fossil fuel phase out, and that is obviously something that has been under discussion for some time, but there's still a lot that needs to happen there in terms of getting some resolutions and some agreement, and it's something we're going to be watching a lot over the next week. There is still a need to keep to limit warming to 1.5. And therefore the ambition levels are quite key, and actually how governments step away and non-state actors step away and what they're doing, but also how they're implementing that on the ground. We also have further ones around ensuring nature is part of it. So we are at the climate COP, but there is also a separate biodiversity COP, and it shouldn't be that those two are separate. They should be considered together, they interact, and we need to deliver for both. Adaptation, whilst we're doing steps for mitigation, and that is very important and cannot be put to one side, it's important that while we're seeing the impacts of climate change already, that adaptation is therefore also very key, and and we're therefore looking at actually the target on adaptation that is coming out. There are further ones around finance, and so that is both looking at the financial architecture and what needs to happen to ensure finance flows, but also around loss and damage, and obviously we've already seen some progress at COP on that area.
And essentially, Matt was meant to be doing this interview, and he asked me to ask you if you could pick one of these that would have the biggest impact, what would it be? But the first cross-cutting thing you mentioned was people, which obviously links into all of that. So could you delve into that a little bit more?
Yeah, it's good the reason we have people there is because they need to be considered as part of this. So you can end up looking at it and, there's lots here. There's lots around Indigenous communities. There's a lot around actually the impacts on people of climate change. I mentioned adaptation. And actually there are a lot of vulnerable communities. So therefore it's important that we consider what will be, if we take certain actions, both, what will stop people from having the negative impacts of climate action, but also what can be positive for them as well, and therefore what can support people. And some of that could be things like skills development or well-being. And there are a lot of things that deliver co-benefits. So yeah, people is an important part of that.
Fantastic. And the other thing that Matt asked was, which of these asks do you think is least likely to be agreed upon during the conference? My money would probably be on the fossil fuel phase out, when we're in a country that would lose a lot of its GDP if that were the case, that's running scared of this kind of narrative.
The fossil fuel phase out is definitely one that we are watching to see what happens. Obviously some of the language that has been talked about before, is still under question, and therefore how far it will actually go in terms of what any outcomes will be. It's something that our businesses really support. We've just, earlier on I was at a session in the Buildings and Business Pavilion, which was around Fossil to Clean, which is a campaign where businesses are supporting to actually say, no, we need the phase out of fossil fuels. Some of that is about the regulation that is needed, but it's also about them taking action, and certainly, how can business push forward and show that actually there is the demand to move away from fossil fuels, and therefore, the supply will hopefully come in terms of clean energy, renewables, and certainly today we're anticipating the energy, the energy announcements that are going to come in terms of the renewables, the energy efficiency.
Yeah, that makes complete sense, something that I'll be watching a lot too. It's one of those where the devil is really in the details. I wanted to come back to what you mentioned at the beginning of our chat, Beverly, when you talked about the importance of convening and the importance of corporate action. And we've mentioned so many things where the private sector will be needed: skills, innovation, finance, collaboration, localised work. We know that a lot of businesses in the UK are willing to be involved in these types of discussions, but what has the appetite been like for you guys ahead of COP? How have you seen the private sector responding to this COP?
We're seeing them very positively responding. There's certainly a lot of corporates here who are really engaging in the topics and looking not just at, what can come here and be discussed or shared in terms of what they're doing, but actually how can we really shift things, and how can they get the support they need to deliver what are quite ambitious targets and strategies for many of them, and that there are things that need to be unlocked to enable them to deliver that, whether that be the regulation, innovation, technology, finance, investment, and sending those signals to their businesses, which means that they can make the shifts that are needed and they can accelerate that faster. And we're seeing, many of them, they're doing some really positive action, but I think there is this need to kind of, ramp that up, and therefore they're keen to do that. And being here and being part of this means that they can help support those areas where that means that they can move faster.
Yeah, we've talked on previous episodes about how most of the business community here is really progressive, and to me at least it looks like there's more of a spirit of collaboration. You'll get one big announcement of 2,000 businesses saying the same thing instead of getting separate releases. Is that something you've seen as well?
Oh, definitely, and I think there is more and more of that, and it's not just, you referenced the UK, but it's not just the UK, it's globally. There are a lot more businesses who are looking at this, who are looking, both mitigation and adaptation, so both looking at the impacts that it's having on their business, and this is therefore, making it an imperative for them to actually therefore take, steps to actually reduce their emissions as well.
Fantastic. Well, Beverly, I'll let you get going. Thank you so much for your time on the pod, and obviously best of luck for everything that the Corporate Leaders Group is doing at this COP.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Yes, so for this next part of the podcast, I've come to the far reaches of the Blue Zone, to the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank Pavilion, to speak to Eric and JP, who are economists at the bank, about their recent pioneering work on nature as infrastructure. So thank you both so much for your time. And I guess for those listening, if we could get a bit of an introduction to that concept and why it's so important to introduce it at this COP.
For us, nature as infrastructure are two basic things. One is we need to think of infrastructure or nature as infrastructure, providing the sort of most precious infrastructure that we have, that is, essential to all human activity, and that requires, of course, valuing nature and allowing for institutions like AIB to invest directly into nature as infrastructure. But it also means that when we looked at traditional infrastructure solutions, we need to think about what can nature deliver itself. And often that there are things there that we don't know fully today, so we need to develop a much deeper understanding of what nature can deliver. And biologists, when they think about nature and what, for example, when you rebuild a degraded area, for example, you benchmark against what can the ecosystem deliver, what kind of services can it deliver at its full potential. And that's what we need to understand when we talk about what infrastructure can nature deliver.
Got it. And we've heard a lot already about the role that multilateral development banks like yourselves can play in climate mitigation. What is their role in protecting biodiversity? Why is that so important? Does it feed into climate adaptation?
Well, it is quite closely related to climate adaptation, and of course also nature can help with climate mitigation by absorbing CO2 or greenhouse gases. So when we talk about MDBs, of course, it's a lot of the same things that they can do in climate. It's about agreeing on standards, making sure that we are all talking the same language. And of course, ultimately, when you go to the financial markets, you need to agree on the metrics. You need to agree on the design of financial instruments. They need to be tradable at some point. So all those things these are things that the MDBs can help with. Obviously, we can also do our own projects, and we are already doing some projects in this space. And we are in this report. What a contribution that we are making to the organization is that we are for the first time applying one of these natural capital assessment tools for specific projects. So again, there are many things that have to do with standardization and turning nature into an asset class where MDBs can play a very important role.
As a UK-based publication, we hear a lot about the maturation of nature as an asset class in Europe. But JP, maybe I could bring you in and ask what it looks like at the moment in Asia. Is it a mature market? Are we still at the very foot of the mountain?
Thank you for the question. I don't think nature as an asset class is anywhere mature as an asset class in Asia. I think a lot more has to be done, but maybe I would say that three things. There needs to be direct investments into nature restoration itself, something that Eric mentioned, that could possibly come through a lot of public funds. But equally, I hope that there will be more private sector investors. So that needs the creation of bankable products, and then allied to on the supply side, and then create the financial instruments like KPI-linked bonds and so on, so that private investors can invest in. Another group of investors that we hope to crowd in is really philanthropic capital. Philanthropic capital can make some of the nature products a little bit more bankable by adding some of the grant elements to make them more financially bankable.
One thing actually that we have been involved in Asia, where it can also be something that can be applied to nature, is securitizing. So taking assets off balance sheets from banks, putting them in warehouses, and then securitizing them and selling them off to institutional investors. Because if we are going to manage to get enough capital into this, we need private capital, but we also need the institutional capital. So finding ways of bringing in that is going to be very important. We have done actually 4 transactions like that in the climate but not in the nature space. Yeah.
On bankability, the report has some interesting findings on risks and opportunities. And on opportunities, there was a finding that nature-based solutions for infrastructure could save $248 billion per year, which is really significant. So how can we communicate that better? Do tools like the TNFD help with assessing risk and opportunity to improve bankability?
So it's interesting that you mentioned the 200 plus billion number that nature-based solution can save. That number, I believe, comes from the UN. But the UN also mentions that today, nature-based solutions only attracts about $100 plus billion of investments per year. So I tried my best to contextualize what does $100 plus billion look like. So it turns out that 100 plus billion is how much the world spends on coffee. So basically, if you think about nature as the most important infrastructure, the world is spending just the amount that it spends on coffee to protect nature. And the UN report says that it has to be scaled up by 3 to 4 times pretty soon. So coming back to the question of bankability, I think like infrastructure gaps, this number is going to be very huge. So $500 billion per year in a couple of decades' time. It has to be met by a partnership of both fiscal revenues, the private sector, and all parts of the society, including philanthropic capital that I mentioned. And we need to find the kind of financial structure, the people who are willing to take the first loss, the second loss, and then find the part that is commercially bankable so that private sector can come in. It is the entire package, the structure that has to be right in order for us to reach the $500 billion target per year to conserve nature and to preserve our long-term sustainability of the planet.
And of course, it will be easier to meet those targets if we have multiple multilateral development banks on board. So with this nature as infrastructure approach in mind, what is your hope to galvanise action from your peers across the world?
So first of all, I would say that we have had tremendous collaboration with the World Bank in producing this report, and they have put together a data set, and this is actually work that's been going on for decades now, and that data set is a very good basis for showing the value of nature and showing also what it would imply to truly value nature. So that is one thing we can do together, and I think we can obviously we are the largest co-investor of the World Bank, the largest co-investor of the Asian Development Bank. We can think of introducing these kind of principles into those development investments in Asia and beyond. You want to say something?
I think Eric is absolutely right, but I think MDBs can come together to create the matrix and the data set, to create the standards in the market, and then put in its own financing and to crowd in the private sector investors. So beyond just money, they are really about knowledge, about data, measurements, and trying to create the awareness of nature as an asset class. A lot of things MDBs can do beyond just the finance.
So a long to-do list there, but a huge opportunity on the table. So I'll leave you guys to the rest of your daily schedule. But thank you so much for coming on this podcast and helping me explore nature finance in a bit more detail. Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming, and thank you for allowing us to talk through nature's infrastructure. It's very important to have this conversation with both the private sector, with the government, with the philanthropies, with the NGOs. All that helps us develop these concepts.
There we go. Thanks very much to Beverly, Eric and JP. And Sarah, do you want the good news or the bad news?
Let's do the bad first. Let's get it out of the way.
So the bad news is that in all of today's madness of interviewing and train riding, and without Matt to lean on, I haven't been able to go through all the emails and select a winner of yesterday's quiz. But the good news is we can bring you another quiz question for this episode, and it can in fact, I guess, be a rollover, we'll put it that way. So tomorrow's winner will instead get a £10 eco gift voucher. We'll see this go on and on and on as the week goes on, and it'll end up being a £50 voucher again. So Sarah, over to you for today's quiz question.
Yeah, so as Luke already mentioned at the start of the episode, it is the UAE's Day of Union, so the day in which the Emirates became the United Arab Emirates. But how long ago did the unification happen? How many years ago did that take place? So I'm looking for a number.
I So almost how old is the UAE, right?
Yeah.
So there you go. Email your answers in to podcast@fav, that's FAV-house.com, and we'll reveal the answer and the rollover winner tomorrow. So hopefully Matt will be well enough to join us here tomorrow. Sunday's no rest day for us here at COP28. Sarah, what have we got coming up?
Yeah, so the World Leaders Summit has come to an end, as has the Business and Climate Philanthropy Forum, but that doesn't mean that the fun stops here. This is the first thematic day at COP. And it's a big theme, as well as health, which we've already mentioned. There will be a focus on relief, recovery and peace. So expect some really difficult conversations going on around COP tomorrow. But also we can bring you some exclusive interviews on that health element, which I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, well, several fantastic themes coming through tomorrow. So that's it from us today. We'll be back for that next episode tomorrow, 3rd of December. We're going to try and head out of COP now and see what we can experience of the UAE's Union Day celebrations, perhaps. Stay cool, everyone, out here in Dubai, and stay warm, everyone, back home in the UK. But until then, it's a goodbye from Sarah.
Goodbye.
And it's a goodbye from me. Goodbye.